Don't forget to hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and drop a comment if you think you've heard everything, because this story will change your mind. It started with the smell. On a quiet September afternoon in Rose Hill, Kansas, a team of deputies stepped into the backyard of a small beige suburban home. The grass was freshly cut, but one patch near the fence looked wrong, uneven, disturbed. The neighbors had called it in days earlier, saying the couple who lived there had been acting off. No one had seen their little girl, Kennedy, in years. Deputy Alvarez knelt near the patch, his gloves slick with sweat, the late summer air pressing down like a weight. He drove the shovel in, once, twice, until the metallic scrape hit something that wasn't earth. A plastic sheet, black, thick, wrapped tight. When they lifted it, the smell told them everything they needed to know. The backyard of Crystina and Joseph Schroers had become a grave. Inside that plastic was the small, decomposed body of a 6-year-old girl, Kennedy, their adopted daughter. Within hours, Rose Hill's quiet suburb transformed into a storm of flashing lights and camera crews. Crystina, pale and shaking, was escorted out of her house in handcuffs, whispering over and over, "It was an accident. It was just punishment." But what kind of punishment ends with a child buried in your backyard? Detectives inside the home found something even more disturbing. In the corner of the basement, under a pile of old toys and Christmas boxes, sat a small wooden container, roughly the size of a storage bin, 16 inches tall, barely enough room for a child to sit inside. The latch was broken, but the outline of duct tape marked where it had once been sealed shut. One of the officers whispered, "God, she made her sleep in there." As investigators pieced together the timeline, neighbors recalled seeing Kennedy years ago, quiet, shy, with wide brown eyes. She had been adopted at 4, part of a sibling group taken from foster care. The Schroers seemed like the perfect couple, active in church, clean-cut, polite. They smiled for every photo, every adoption event. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. The other children later told investigators that Kennedy was the bad one. She cried at night, asked for food, moved too much when she was supposed to be quiet. For that, Crystina would put her in the box. Sometimes for hours, sometimes all night. Joseph, her husband, claimed he didn't know. He said Crystina handled discipline, and he just stayed out of it. But text messages between the couple told another story. Messages about the punishment box, keeping her still, and no more screaming tonight. The box wasn't a secret between them, it was a system. And as the medical examiner's report came in, the truth grew even darker. Kennedy didn't just suffocate. Heavy blankets had been stacked over the box. A crib was pushed on top to keep her from moving. There were scratch marks on the inside lid. Tiny fingernails broken, embedded in the wood. Crystina told detectives it was meant to teach her to be still. But the look in her eyes said something else. Not guilt, not grief, but control. Detective Monroe, who led the investigation, said later, "In all my years, I've never seen a punishment designed like that. It wasn't about teaching, it was about breaking." Then came the twist no one expected. Crystina's quiet confession, whispered during interrogation. She wasn't supposed to die that night. Joseph helped me bury her. The room went silent. Outside, floodlights illuminated the spot where Kennedy's small body had been unearthed. The town of Rose Hill was left staring at the perfect family that had turned into a nightmare. But detectives were about to find something that made even seasoned officers freeze in disbelief. Because when they opened the hard drive recovered from Crystina's computer, what they found changed everything. Detective Monroe sat in the dim light of the interrogation room, his fingers tapping against a small flash drive. The evidence techs had just finished pulling files from Crystina Schroer's computer. The folder was labeled training footage. At first, they thought it was for homeschooling or therapy sessions. What they opened instead made even the most hardened officers leave the room.
The first video began with static, then a faint child's voice. "Please, Mommy, I'll be good." A camera mounted high on the wall showed the corner of a dim bedroom. Kennedy sat cross-legged on the floor wearing pajamas too small for her. Christina's voice came from off-screen, calm, cold, and deliberate. "You know what happens when you lie." She opened the wooden box, the same one found in the basement. Kennedy looked at it, trembling. Then, without another word, Christina forced her inside and shut the lid. The screen flickered, minutes passed. The camera kept rolling. No yelling, no crying, just silence. Then a faint thump, then another. Detective Monroe paused the footage, unable to keep watching. It wasn't just one recording, there were dozens, labeled by date, organized by incidents. The earliest dated back to 2020, the year Kennedy was reported as transferred to another care facility, according to the paperwork Christina had forged. This wasn't a one-time mistake, it was a pattern. The prosecutors would later describe it as a home designed for punishment. Hidden cameras in every room, lock codes on every bedroom door, chore charts that controlled when the children could eat, talk, or even move. The children, 3 of them, all adopted, told investigators that Christina used food as a weapon. They ate cold oatmeal for breakfast, canned vegetables for dinner, and sometimes nothing at all. The youngest boy said he'd once tried to sneak Kennedy a piece of bread. Christina caught him and made him watch as she punished his sister. Every system in place looked legitimate: adoption papers, foster care approval, financial aid forms. But beneath it was fraud. The Schroeders had collected state payments for years, claiming they were providing special needs care. In reality, they were pocketing the money while breaking the children down piece by piece. When investigators confronted Joseph, his story cracked under pressure. He said Christina controlled everything, that she'd tell him what to say, what to sign, and when to smile for caseworkers. But phone records showed he'd helped buy the lumber for the box. He'd texted Christina about keeping the others in line. This wasn't just one person's madness, it was a shared delusion of power and control. The investigation reached national headlines. Kansas couple accused an adopted daughter's death. The town of Rose Hill couldn't believe it. The Schroeders had attended church every Sunday, hosted barbecues, smiled for neighborhood photos. But inside that perfect house, every wall had ears, cameras capturing every act of control. Then came the biggest revelation yet. On the last video file, dated November 23, 2020, the night Kennedy died, Christina's voice could be heard again. The box sat in the middle of the room, a blanket draped over it. Kennedy's muffled voice begged to be let out. Christina turned to the camera and whispered something that chilled investigators to the bone. "She'll sleep better this way." The footage ended at 2:14 a.m. By sunrise, Kennedy was gone. Christina never called for help. She didn't tell Joseph until the next day. Instead, they dug a shallow hole in the backyard and buried the little girl beneath a patch of sod. Then they went on as if nothing had happened. For almost 4 years, no one asked, no one checked, no one noticed a child was missing. When Detective Monroe played that final clip in court, the gallery went silent. Even seasoned reporters looked down, unable to meet the screen. But as the prosecution built their case, one chilling detail emerged, and it had nothing to do with the videos. In a locked drawer inside Christina's bedroom, detectives found a notebook. Inside it were detailed notes about each child's progress, dates, punishments, and behavioral scores. The last entry for Kennedy read only 3 words: "Didn't learn fast enough." And at the bottom of that page, written in blue ink, was something else. Something that would lead investigators to question everything they thought they knew about Christina's motive. It read, "She wasn't the first." The notebook had been sitting in the evidence room for weeks before anyone noticed the last few pages were missing, torn out, carefully. The handwriting stopped abruptly after the line, "She wasn't the first." Detective Monroe ordered another search of the Schroeder property. They'd already combed through every inch of the backyard, but this time the team focused on the garage. Under a layer of old boxes and garden tools, they found a locked trunk, heavy, rusted, sealed with 2 metal latches. When the lock was cut, a silence fell over the room. Inside, there were no bodies, but there were photos. Dozens of them. Children. Different faces, different years. Each photo marked with a number and a short note. 3 days good. 8 without asking. Cried again.
The earliest dated back to 2016, 3 years before Kennedy's adoption. Crystina and Joseph had been foster parents long before they became adoptive parents. They'd received children from multiple agencies, keeping them for months at a time. Each placement ended with an excuse. The child wasn't adjusting. We couldn't meet their needs. But after cross-checking with state records, Monroe's team discovered something chilling. At least 2 of those children had gone missing from the system. No follow-up reports, no transfers, just vanished. And somehow, their files had been erased. That revelation sent shockwaves through Kansas's Department of Children and Families. The agency launched an internal review, but key records were missing or signed off by a single employee, an adoption coordinator who had since retired. Investigators suspected Crystina may have exploited loopholes, using fake reports to close cases and keep payments flowing. Kennedy might not have been the first child to suffer. She was just the first one found. During trial, Crystina sat motionless as prosecutors read her own words aloud from the notebook. They described her methods, her corrections, her obsession with obedience. She didn't cry. She didn't look away. When asked why she wrote those words, she wasn't the first. She gave a flat answer. There were others who failed too. They just learned faster. The courtroom gasped. Joseph Schroer, her husband, finally broke down on the stand. He admitted helping bury Kennedy, admitted to lying to investigators, admitted to forging reports to keep payments coming in. But when asked if he'd ever seen Crystina harm another child before Kennedy, his voice cracked. She told me they were gone, sent back. I didn't ask where. The prosecutor leaned forward. Do you believe her? He hesitated, then whispered, not anymore. When the verdict came, it was swift. 215 months in prison for Crystina Schroer, aggravated endangerment and fraud for Joseph. Outside the courthouse, crowds held candles for Kennedy, the little girl whose voice had finally been heard, even after death. Reporters called it one of the most disturbing cases in Kansas history. But one image haunted Detective Monroe long after the trial ended. During evidence cataloging, he noticed one photo from the trunk. A little boy, about 5, wearing the same pajamas Kennedy had on in one of the videos. No record of his name, no matching file in the system, just a face staring into the lens, frozen in time. The photo was dated October 2018. To this day, no one knows who that boy was or what happened to him. The house in Rose Hill was eventually torn down. A new family moved in, unaware of the nightmare buried beneath their backyard. The ground has been replanted, the grass green again, but for those who worked the case, the scars never faded. In a rare interview years later, Monroe said quietly, "I still hear her voice sometimes on those tapes. She called it discipline. I call it control. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it smiles for the camera." And maybe that's the most terrifying part, because in every quiet neighborhood, behind every perfect picture, there can be a secret no one's ready to uncover. If you thought this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe, because the next case might be even darker.